Hi, everybody. It's Mike from Here, the Watchmen. I want to, before we get started with the show today, just ask everybody to pray for all of our friends in the Midwest and Central states that are getting just absolutely walloped by this crazy storm passing through the country. I've received several emails from you this morning. Thank you so much. Jeannie and I are doing just fine up here in our undisclosed location in the mountains of Idaho. We did get snow last night, but no big deal. So we're going to get going here with the show right out of the gate. We've got a guest that's got another interview. I'm sure she has interviews every day. It's a very wonderful young lady who wrote a book called The Copper Scroll Project, and it's Shelly Neese. Shelly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
And if I can just give a little bit of folks, for you, a little narrative on the book, it weaves history and adventure in the retelling of one man's riveting journey to unearth the hidden treasures of Jerusalem's temple, as recorded in this little known scroll within the larger Dead Sea collection. The book itself reads like a novel, but it's absolutely based on the true story of adventurer Jim Barfield. It will be of special interest to history buffs, Dead Sea Scroll enthusiasts, and adventure seekers, but most importantly, believers who are energized when the the historical aspects of the Bible is proven to be true. So, Shelley, again, thanks for joining us, but I just got to ask you, how did this ever come about?
I know, right? Thanks, Mike. I always feel like I want to preface by saying, this isn't just clickbait. Like those are all sort of grandiose promises that I feel like usually just lead to clickbait on the internet. But no, I mean the Copper Scroll is as real can be, and you're sort of one Wikipedia search away from finding out that all scholars agree that the Copper Scroll is a true and authentic document and that it's a 2,000-year-old treasure map.
And that's really what it is. It's a 2,000-year-old treasure map.
Absolutely. So that's where I feel like, in some sense, I mean, I've been writing this book for 10 years, just following Jim Barfield, an arson investigator from Oklahoma, who really is the first one to sufficiently come up with a theory of where the treasures are buried from the Copper Scroll, because the Copper Scroll was found in 1953, and even though, I mean, Dead Sea Scroll scholars agree on very little, and Dead Sea Scroll conferences can end in fist fights among scholars, but the one thing that there is a lot of anonymity on, or agreement on, is that this is an authentic document because it has no other purpose. It's written very dryly. It's written on copper. The Copper Scroll is 7 feet long, 2 feet wide. There's nothing like it from antiquity. Certainly no other Dead Sea Scrolls that are on copper, but really nothing else in antiquity like it. And when they were able to unroll it, it's just this, it's written in 12 columns, 57 plus locations of where copious amounts of treasure, was buried at least 2,000 years ago. And really, the thing is that it was written so dryly that there's no central characters in the Copper Scroll. There's no legend associated with the Copper Scroll. So unless it was an inventory list for real people in a real place and time, it just has no value apart from that. It's actually a very boring document to read on its own, except for the fact that it's pointing to copious amounts of ancient antiquities. But, it'll read like, in Matia's courtyard, buried under the cistern, or under the ruins in the Valley of Achor, buried at these steps going 40 cubits to the east. So, it's just very, very specific. And it's almost like the authors of the scroll were writing it as a note to themselves to go and recover these items later, which is crazy.
Wow, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I mean, if you look back at it, first of all, without giving away the clue to where the treasure is, where was the scroll found?
So the copper scroll was found cave 3 outside of Qumran. Qumran is you'll hear it referred to a lot of times like an ancient monastic settlement. That's because our Christian minds kind of applied monastery to this place, but it was an ascetic group of Jews that had thought that the temple priesthood was corrupt, and so they were self isolating in the desert, in the Judean desert. And Qumran's not so far from Jerusalem, but it's a world away in other ways. And so they were living there. The profound or most prevalent theory is that the Essenes, a sectarian group, that they were the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, or if not the authors, at least the owners of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so all of the caves that the Dead Sea Scrolls came out of are around Qumran, this ancient settlement, including the Copper Scroll, which they number the caves according to the order that they were found, and this was cave 3, and it was found with other Dead Sea Scrolls. The roof of the cave for cave 3 had collapsed in antiquity, so most of the other scrolls had been destroyed, and they were in a pretty fragmentary state whenever the archaeologists found cave 3. They could tell that it once had housed a wealth of scrolls, but when the jars, the Dead Sea Scrolls were kind of stored in these really unique jars, and so when the roof of the cave had collapsed, the jars had crushed, and there was scroll fragments and rat's nest, around the cave, and really in a poor state. But it was on the very last day, in the last few hours of this excavation, that they realized that the cave was more like a cave complex, that there was a side cave, and it was covered with, whether or not it was a collapsed wall or a wall that had been placed there on purpose, like a false wall, but behind it, they chipped through it, and they see 2 copper rolls, the color of, the Statue of Liberty, because copper did what copper does, and it got that green patina on it, and it was resting on a man-made shelf, and it was like nothing they had ever seen.
That is amazing. I mean, that is absolutely amazing. I can't even imagine what that would be like to have found that. Now, the Qumran. Why is the Qumran so important to the history of Israel?
Right. Well, the Qumran ruins themselves, had the Dead Sea Scrolls not been associated with Qumran, I don't even think it would be a stop on a tour of the Holy Land. Qumran is not a stunning sight. It's not Masada perched up on a mountain plateau. It's not En Gedi with spring-fed pools and ibex wandering around, So really, without its association with the Dead Sea Scrolls, Qumran is not an impressive ruin. But because of its association with the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's a holy and sacred site in Israel in that association alone. Because, as many of your listeners probably already know, the Dead Sea Scrolls are the most important find, in my opinion, ever in modern history, but certainly it's well known that for the 20th century, because they predate the oldest forms of the Bible that we had at the time by 1,000 years. So this is bringing the Bible back to the time of Jesus. This is as close, it's all Old Testament scriptures, but as close as you could get to the original authorship of the scrolls.
Wow.
And so whoever lived at Qumran, the way that we imagine it playing out in the scene is that the Romans are knocking on the gate. They know that danger is coming. They hide these scrolls in the caves surrounding the settlement, and assume that they'll retrieve them later. But they were safely hidden there for 2,000 years, which turned out to be the perfect climate and temperature to be able to preserve them for that time, and also not as trafficked as Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been destroyed, occupied, and rebuilt a gazillion times over 2,000 years. So they really wouldn't have been safer anywhere else. That's just kind of God's hand over that, and then delivering it on the eve of Israel's rebirth. The whole story, like only God could write this script,
Well, and now Jim Barfield. Who is Jim Barfield, and how does he figure into this story of yours?
Right. So I met Jim Barfield 10 years ago at a conference in or Dallas or San Antonio. And at the time, like, I'm just a journalist who's supposed to be writing about politics. I work for a Christian Zionist organization called Jerusalem Connection. I was the editor of the magazine then. I've been with them ever since. I'm the president now, but at the time, really kind of misplaced writing about politics. Didn't really care. It's not my scene. And so I meet this man, Jim Barfield, and start talking to him. He's there with some friends, and at that point in his journey, he had been a Dead Sea Scroll enthusiast. He, is an award-winning arson investigator from Oklahoma, but by no means does that background sort of fit what you would what you would describe as someone who you would expect to be a Copper Scroll expert. But he certainly was able to wrap his mind around the Copper Scroll in a way that no one else had before. He met with Vendell Jones. Vendell Jones is someone who's kind of really, whose name is now associated with the Copper Scroll in lots of ways. Vendell Jones has since passed away, but he spent 30 years looking for the Copper Scroll treasure. So Jim Barfield had done all of his own Dead Sea Scroll research. He just loved the Dead Sea Scrolls. He's the kind of guy that would study them in the fire station, between calls. Just a very unique man and character. And so once he had met with Vendell Jones had told him, look, the Copper Scroll has more kind of historical importance and prophetic importance than any of the other Dead Sea Scrolls, which was sort of Vendell's, grandiose way of talking in general, but it hit him because up until then he had really been bored by the Copper Scroll because he was looking for Dead Sea Scrolls that had really spiritual significance, that, prophetic significance, and the Copper Scroll read like a dry list. And so he just decided to look at the Copper Scroll with different eyes, not with a mind to solve it, but just with a mind to gain some insight and information from it. And if you can find a translation of the Copper Scroll online, and it's really just kind of amazing to read through it and build whatever your imagination can from a covert temple rescue operation 2,000 years ago. But it begins under the ruins in the Valley of Achor. And then it goes on to say, it's steps leading eastward, 40 cubits buried here, and it gives a certain amount of treasure, which the amount of treasure of gold, silver, bronze vessels listed in the Copper Scroll is so enormous that everyone assumes that it has to be related to the Jewish temples. Whether or not it's the first or the second temple is up for debate, but there was nowhere in Israel that had access to that kind of wealth that we're talking about other than the temple treasury. And so he looked at that, and what he did was, and it's really, sometimes like the most obvious answers are the right answers, but they had never occurred to anyone before. He read those opening lines, under the ruins in the Valley of Achor, as a preamble for the rest of the Copper Scroll, as seeing that all of these next locations are buried there. If you can find the ruins in the Valley of Achor, then see if you can match up the rest of the Copper Scroll descriptions with what you see on the ground in those ruins under the valley in the Valley of Achor. And so he identified Qumran, the most famous ruins and the ones associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls, the ones closest to where the Copper Scroll was found, and just set out matching what was there in the ruins, the architecture of the ruins that he could see from, he's the kind of guy that had an aerial map of Qumran in his home study. So he just took that map, took other information that had been published with measurements of stairs and cisterns and things like that, and was able to find a match pretty immediately for the first 5 locations in the Copper Scroll. And then, he's an investigator. So then he proceeded to write a 270 plus page report matching every single location listed in the Copper Scroll with a landmark at Qumran. It's
Wow. I mean,
totally crazy.
that is like, what an amazing story. I mean, this is like Indiana Jones. You know, I mean, it's just it truly is amazing. Now, Jim obviously thinks he knows where the treasure is. Has he been able to dig for the treasure, excavate, or has he been prevented from doing that?
Right. Well, so what's amazing is that pretty shortly after I met him at that San Antonio conference, and he's a very, very likable person, So even if I didn't know if he was on to anything at all, and I lived in Israel for a few years and studied there. And so I knew, it would be such a long shot for him even to get in touch with the Israel Antiquities Authority or even, to make that next step. It's a pretty pretty serious brick wall built around them to keep them away from any potential crazies. And so so I just kind of liked him as a person, and I liked the story, and I liked the way that the copper scroll could be used as a teaching tool for people. And so I started writing about it from that perspective. And the book talks about this, and I can't, it's too long of a story to explain here, but through just kind of a God series of events, he is able pretty quickly to get a meeting with the head of the Israel Antiquities Authority and shows him his research, and they are not prideful in their approach to, to what they're seeing this American, arson investigator bringing to them, and they're floored by it. And so, fast forward through a few hurdles, he's able to go to Qumran in 2009 with the number 2 archaeologist over Qumran, and who was very enthusiastic about the research and who had studied it and was prepared for the dig, and excavate with them, or I would say not so much excavate as what it turned out to be, which was more probing. And the first few days, so I was there just as the historian. Jim Barfield has kind of like a copper scroll team, and so Chris Knight is also part of the team, and he's been there for all of the major copper scroll events. So there was lots of witnesses, I will say, at this, and so the copper scroll project team was there. I was there, kind of recording things as a historian, just amazed that he was even able to get to this point. And you could ask anyone that was there. It was a very strange course of events because the archaeologist went from being kind of enthusiastic and ready to probe pretty significant parts of Qumran. And he got a phone call when we were at one of the most important sites that was probably the easiest to excavate. I will grant you that it became a problem excavating or trying to probe inside Qumran because the ruins are so important themselves. And the Copper Scrolls says to dig really, really deep. So it's not archaeology, it's more like treasure hunting in that way, because you don't otherwise have a reason to dig a 9-foot hole anywhere in Qumran. So that part was kind of uncomfortable for an archaeologist, and I will grant him that. At a place outside of Qumran, which we were digging, it shouldn't have been a problem, but he got a phone call, which probably for 3 years, we had no idea why that phone call significantly adjusted his mood. We learned later that it was a group of American archaeologists, or probably 2 in particular, who were protesting the very fact that he was there with, following the research of a non-credentialed, that's not that Jem was an archaeologist or even a PhD. And so I think they just kind of had a hissy fit about it, and it's called Azor, that's the American group, and they had sued Israel before for not being transparent enough, and so, or had sued the Israel Antiquities Authority. So from all that I can tell, they were an effective lobby in shutting that dig down, and it worked.
Well, I'm not surprised. I'm really not surprised. I mean,
Yeah.
It's just interesting that it was American archaeologists. I'm listening to you tell the story, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, who in Israel shut this down? And
Yes.
it's just amazing, and it's I mean, all we have to do is look at the news today, and our whole higher education system seems to be in a complete shambles right now. It's
And
just
this was, there's kind of like a silent war in biblical archaeology of biblical minimalist versus biblical maximalist. So people that see the Bible as historically reliable and use it in the process of archaeology and excavations, and those that think that's ridiculous and that should be, negative and not in any and not scholarly. And so I mean, I'm probably going to get emails in response to what I'm telling you now because I do every time. But I mean, to me, it was kind of just your typical sort of academic hissy fit for like, Freud talks about the narcissism of small differences. And so what Jim Barfield was saying, what the Israeli archaeologists, which no Israeli archaeologists have confronted him or had a problem with his theory or what he's promoting or what he's trying to do, because Jim Barfield, you wouldn't be able to find a single interview where he doesn't give God the credit, where he doesn't say, oh, I know with certainty that this is there, because he can't know. I mean, he doesn't know if Babylonians, Romans, whatever happened in history, that someone was able to find these things before anybody else did. So there's no red flags that Jim Barfield would wave to someone internally, except for these American archaeologists who feel very uncomfortable with any scholarship that takes the Bible too seriously.
well, this is very interesting, very very interesting. Not surprising, just deeply interesting. You know,
Right.
we're going to take a little more time, folks, than I normally take on my show because I have another question for you, Shelly, that I think is very important, and that is, you're in your subtitle, you talk about how an ancient secret fuels the battle for the Temple Mount. How does the Temple Mount tie into the Copper Scroll project?
Right. That's a great question. And I always regret if we can't get to that in shorter interviews. So thank you. But so the Temple Mount, right now there's something going on in Israel, Temple Mount denial. So the idea, and we'll dive into a little bit more political here now, and not 2,000 years ago, but what's happening in Israel right now is that a big part of the Palestinian narrative, starting with Yasser Arafat, is that the Jewish temple never existed on the Temple Mount. That this is like an Islamic holy site, and the Jews have no prior claim to it. And it's a bogus theory. No, nobody in their right mind would, there's enough, even outside of the Bible, there's enough historical proof to know that two Jewish temples have existed on the Temple Mount. And so, this is just a game of politics, that if they deny that the Jews have any right to the Temple Mount, then potentially that would affect their claim to Jerusalem as a whole, and especially to the holy site. And so the Temple Mount movement is a group in Israel who are motivated. People immediately kind of jump in their heads that they're motivated to build the third temple. But I mean, that's so far from their reality now. I mean, certainly Temple Mount Institute and those kind of groups that are more focused on that ideal. But right now, Jews don't even have the right, Christians don't have the right to pray on the Temple Mount, to bring a book of Psalms on the Temple Mount. They have to go they can only visit it at certain times, or prohibited otherwise. If you or outwardly look Jewish at all, in terms of that you have a kippah or a Star of David necklace, you have to go into a special line. And so, which, as you'll remember last year, whenever Prime Minister Netanyahu, in response to an attack on the Temple Mount, tried to put metal detectors on there for the Muslim side, I mean, it was almost declared all-out war in response to that. But Jews regularly go through metal detectors. They can't get on top of the Temple Mount without going through a metal detector, but also will get their book of Psalms confiscated from them, or their prayer book, and Christians aren't allowed to pray it there either. So to me, the first line of defense is just having religious freedom on the Temple Mount for Jews and Christians to be able to worship up there if they want to. And so how the Copper Scroll Project kind of got aligned with the Temple Mount movement was something that happened very naturally and organically. people that look to the Temple Mount, that visit the Temple Mount, I'm talking about Jews and Israelis, religious Israelis, found out about Jim Barfield, found out about what he was trying to do, and championed it, and have just tried to make the right meetings, to make the right connections, to get through the bureaucratic brick walls that exist, but also the political ones. Qumran is technically Area C of Israel, so that means that it's technically West Bank. And so according to international law, whatever comes out of the ground there could be disputed, that there could be a claim that it actually doesn't belong to Israel, which is nuts to me, but this is facts on the ground. And so if this happens, if Jim Barfield is able to just get the right band of allies to be able to push this forward, it means also facing down some international laws, some Palestinian protest, and all the things that you can imagine. So he needs these allies. He needs their support. And that's what has happened just organically over the last 10 years in friendships and relationships, and him sharing his research with them.
What a great story, Shelly. Where do people find this book?
So, I'm supposed to say anywhere that you buy books so that I'm not showing any favoritism, but it's obviously on Amazon, and if you're a Kindle person or a Nook person or ebook, it's electronically available in all those sources, and it's in paperback, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, anywhere that you get books. And it's growing arms and legs of its own, which I can tell you, I'm a new author. This is not like any credit to myself, but I really feel like for Jim Barfield and the Copper Scroll Project team, that people are hungry for biblical archaeology, and they're hungry to know more about first century Jerusalem from the time of, whether or not they're Christians, to just dive in to the history of the Bible and the land of the Bible and the people of the Bible, which are all still there and are still, living in covenant. And so I think that this is just filling a void and a need for people's own Bible study and their own walks, and what they, just in this current space and time, what they want to grasp onto.
Amen. Amen to that. And do you personally have a website people can check out?
Sure, shellyneese.com, and it has a book excerpt on there, and I blog on there. And so as things sort of develop, I mean, part of what the Copper Scroll Project means is, when you read the book, you'll realize that there's likely going to be a book number 2. So there's, to be able to stay informed on this second phase. And then Jim Barfield also has a website. So if you just Google Copper Scroll Project, that'll probably be the first thing that comes up on Google. And, yeah. So, he's got some really cool videos on there too that explain the research, which, is crazy that he put those out there in terms of, it just shows how trusting that he is with, once the world has this information, that, they really can't deny the accuracy of what he's saying.
Wow. Well, there you have it. The author, Shelly Neese, the book, The Copper Scroll Project. Get busy, get out there and take a look at it. Shelly, again, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Mike.
Well, God bless you for everything you're doing. Folks, that's going to wrap it up today for this edition of the Watchmen's Report. As we always say here on the show, remember, there's nothing that you can't do with Jesus in your heart, except nothing at all. Get out there, get busy, activate your faith. Hopefully we'll see some of you in Dallas, Texas, March 28th through the 31st at Hear the Watchmen. Just visit hearthewatchmen.com. Come out and meet Derek and Sharon Gilbert, L.A. Marzulli, Pastor Paul Bagley, me, and a few other people. There's still time to get some tickets. If you can't do that, you can just avail yourself of the live stream. Use the code HTW20. So we'll see you here again next time on the Watchmen's Report.